Now, I think this is true of many tuba players, and that's why it's also interesting to write about them because they stand as kind of examples of what how you really find passion, and that is through one thing, and that's hard work.
Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me on the Gift of Need podcast. I'm Jude DeMeglio-Trang. I'm an author and an observer of human need in society. And I think that there is an overlooked power to our human need, and that's what this podcast is all about. We seek to talk about how it shapes our behavior and our relationships and society as a whole. And my personal belief is that our needs are not burdens, but they are actually opportunities and gifts. And my guest today is Sam Quinones, who has been here with us before, a New York Times bestselling author, National Book Critics Award winner. And we're going to be talking about his latest book, The Perfect Tuba. Hi, Sam.
How you doing, Jude? Good to be with you again.
Yes, thank you for joining me. I'm always excited. You're one of my favorite storytellers. So
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Well, so Sam has been my guest before when we discussed his other award-winning books, Dreamland and The Least of Us, talking about the drug epidemic here in the United States and how it related directly to the problem with community and the lack thereof, and how community has kind of disintegrated a lot in the last 50 years in America. And so today, while it may seem like we're discussing a totally disrelated topic, we are going to be talking about tubas, and which is fun, and bands and music. And you will be surprised to see the connection between The Perfect Tuba and the themes of Sam's work most of his life. So keep listening and learn some fascinating insights about human nature and human need. So Sam, probably a good place to start would be to have you give us a little bit of your background and experience as a journalist and an author.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Jude. Yeah. Well, I've been a reporter and journalist and author 38 years. Written 5 books, the three of which are behind me right now. I consider myself a crime reporter. That's how I started out in journalism, and I really enjoy that a lot. My previous 2 books were about the opioid epidemic. The Dreamland was about OxyContin and heroin and the first stages of what we call now the opioid epidemic. The last book, The Least of Us, before the Tuba book, it was about fentanyl, methamphetamine, and the synthetic drugs coming out of Mexico. And so this took up, writing about these 2 topics took up about 12 years of my life. Really consumed me, and it was kind of the same story a lot, which was people searching for happiness through something they buy, right? And this seems to be the motto of modern American consumer capitalism, that you can be happy if you buy our stuff, whatever that stuff is. Could be fentanyl, could be an iPhone, could be Pizza Hut pizza, whatever it is, right? And so when I finished The Least of Us, I really felt like I wanted to do something very different. I wanted to write about people who are looking for fulfillment from things that they cultivate from within, not buy from without, right?
Right.
And I do not play the tuba. I was never in marching band. However, when I was at the LA Times 2012, I did 2 stories about the tuba in Mexican immigrant Los Angeles, which is a huge instrument physically, but very popular as well.
Right.
And the reason I did that was just because it was a strange story, and yet it was, people would have these parties and they would hire bands with tubas in them because the tuba kind of reflected how well they had done in the United States. They were immigrants. They come here poor, and now they were able to hire a band with a big tuba. It was like it was something like that. And so I after that, after those stories, I just began interviewing tuba players. At the time, I really didn't know why. I had no real goal in mind. But when you find somebody who does something for the pure love of it, you stick with that person, that there will be great stories that you can find. I know this as a journalist.
Right.
The tuba players don't do it for great promise of wealth or fame, right? It's just because the tuba has taught them what they're capable of, how beautiful they can sound with proper work and proper dedication and focus and all this. And also because as I was finished with the books on I was also writing about all the things that we have allowed to be sold to us that are addictive and in our economy right now. And that is, pornography, gambling, junk food, ultra-processed food, ultra-processed marijuana, on and on. Of course, all the apps on smartphones, which are really like the delivery vehicle for all of that. And I just wanted to write about something else, and I thought that as my agent said, you should see now what book you might be able to write about the tuba. And so I focused for the first time, really, instead of doing an interview here, interview there, I really began to focus on tuba players and what stories they might tell. And that led me then, eventually I began to include band directors, because band directors also were like tuba players. They were just on a bigger scale, as one tuba teacher said, which is to say, you've got, you are looking to create something. They are community enhancers, both the tuba player and the band director, and community, and you're creating community. And in the band director's case, you are looking for that wonderful light to go on in the eyes of your students, right? And as time went on, I began to think, actually, I wanted to write about something radically different, not write about addiction at all, and yet it boomeranged back to be like these two groups were like the antidote.
Isn't that something? Isn't that
Yes,
something?
to what I've been writing about in these earlier books.
Yep. I think because if most of the people listening are like me, you've never given a second thought to tubas. Like you might think about violin when you go to hear a concert. And, I've seen I just remember that incredible violin player that was on that Yanni concert 20 years ago. And she just fascinated you. You think of those lead instruments, right? Like when you go to hear a good band, you think of the Edge's guitar, how it influenced. Right. But the tuba, no, never the tuba. And certainly not unless you're part of a marching band. I mean, they just weren't in high school. They weren't the cool people. They just weren't. And so but as a musician, I play keyboard, and I do know about that, kind of that repetition and practice it's very unexciting. It's especially frustrating when you're just starting out and you first put your hands on the keyboard or on the guitar neck. Or from what I've heard about horns, that's particularly difficult because you're having to use your, a different part of your body
Sure,
your hands.
sure.
So, but
I think that the tuba is interesting because the tuba, nobody starts wanting to play the tuba.
No, that's what came out in your book was
nobody. You are given the tuba. Right. You were made to play the tuba very often because you're late for band class first day of 7th grade. So it's the only one that's available. But that's what also makes it fascinating to write about, because people then come to love it. It's not like you start out with, I want to play the sax and that's the only instrument. No, you're given this instrument. You don't really know what it is. You certainly don't know how to fill it with air. And then you learn, and it shows you what you're capable of.
That's
right?
What I loved was you talked about the extraordinary determination that these kids had to have to get good at something. I mean, like the one story about the guy playing the one note over and
Right.
over again, his teacher making him play it. And I'm thinking, I would have killed myself or run, right?
Right.
But they had this determination. Now, some of that relates to, or a lot of it in the communities that you wrote about, related to part of it being that immigrant story, right?
Well, in part, but I mean, the tuba really is played all across America. It's not just in the immigrant
Right,
world.
right.
However, in the stories you're referring to, two bands on the Texas border with Mexico, the Rio Grande Valley, as it's known, the southern part of the of way at the south of Texas, and yes, these were towns, very small towns, 98% Hispanic, very poor, and kids without any they could barely afford their instruments, and they definitely could not afford music lessons,
Right.
and so they were always kind of limited, except for when they had these inspired teachers. And I wrote about two bands in which the teachers understood that there was this gold there among their kids. They had to be trained, they had to be trained hard, and also they had to they couldn't afford music lessons, so the teachers themselves had to become their music teachers. I'm not just teaching them marching and all that, but they had to teach them the basics of the clarinet, the basics of the flute or the French horn, or what have you. And it's the amazing stories in those bands. Roma, Texas band. Roma, Texas is a town of 11,000 people. And no one in Texas knows where Roma, Texas actually is. Brownsville, there was a high school, the southernmost high school in all of Texas is Lopez High. And both of these schools were heavily Mexican and heavily and very poor, and yet rose out of nothing to be some of the best bands in the state, competing head to head with the wealthiest bands in Texas, which really are the dominant bands, the bands from the tech suburbs of Austin, the suburbs of Dallas, Fort Worth, and to some degree, the suburbs of Houston as well. I loved that story because these kids, came out of nothing, and the band directors were, they were serious. They were not messing around. But they were also prepared. This is what they were also doing. And I found this fascinating too. One of them in particular, George Trevino, said, I'm not there to be their friends. I'm there to prepare them to unleash their creativity when the music that they're asked to play is so difficult, challenging, and yet filled with beautiful moments of inspiration. But they have to be prepared to receive those moments. And that was a beautiful thing. And so I wrote about how he trained his band to become the first honor band, which is a great honor in Texas to be the honor band, the first honor band from the Rio Grande Valley, and the legendary concert that this one band of 30 little kids gave, high school kids gave to this Texas Music Educators Association conference, which is just filled with all the music educators from all over the state. It was this gorgeous. I mean, it made me cry when I was writing the dang thing, man. It was just so beautiful. But it was also about a larger theme in the book, I think, which the tuba is definitely about, and that is the liberation of creativity. The tuba has always been limited. You can only play this. We don't think the tuba's worth more than this, and whole notes, and tuba players have been rebelling against that for some time and pushing back. The same way those kids down the Rio Grande Valley, nothing was expected of them. Very little was expected of them. And they rose instead to achieve these remarkable things. The two bands, one Roma and Lopez. For me, the tuba was a lot like that as well. It was like all this instrument that had been kind of segregated, ghettoized, and was, people were saying no. Tuba players were saying no. That's what Tuba Woodstock was about. Tuba Woodstock was this great meeting of all the tuba players, first largest meeting of the tuba players in the history of the instrument at Indiana University in 1973. All these tuba players, all alone in their little worlds, came out of the woodwork and converged in Indiana University. And what they all learned was that there were many of them, many more than they'd ever imagined, but also that they all wanted to be free in what they could play, how well they could play. They had to require more of themselves, but that they wanted to break from the constraints of other musicians, band directors had imposed on them. And to me, this was also, having written about addiction and the enslavement of addiction, I felt to write about people seeking their own creative freedom was just such a powerful thing.
Well, and that, as I read the book, like I said, you know, it's such a such an interesting story, and you went into all these human interest stories, and then as I was reading it out loud to my husband, he went, "There are so many names, I'm getting them I'm getting them mixed up," and that's it. There's all these stories that you brought out about these people, and
Yeah.
tell us about how the school and the marching bands met the needs for the teams and the communities that they performed in, right? Because you're talking about how they met the needs for the personal fulfillment, you know, through working together with others, which, you know, you can talk a little bit more about, but also it did something for their communities, right?
Oh, I think absolutely. First of all, of course, it takes a while to develop a really good band culture, and neither of these schools had it for a while, and that was the part of the story. But when you do that, when you're able to develop a band culture that prizes excellence, and what that means is the kids in 9th and 10th and 11th and 12th grade are telling the 7th and 8th graders, this is our standard, and you're going to meet it, or you're not going to be part of the band. There was like a kind of a serious hierarchy, and then those kids, as they rose, imposed that same culture. It was a culture too of this. I thought was very, very interesting, and this came from Al Cortinas, who was really, in my view, kind of one of the visionaries of band in the Rio Grande Valley. He came to longtime band instructor by the time he finally came to Roma, and over the next 8 years, 10 years, transformed that band into something that was really profound. Then retires but leaves a culture behind that is really about achieving excellence among the kids who do that. When you get that, then you've got kids feeling, you know, I am somebody, and parents feeling, oh my God, this is great. Meanwhile, it's really important to understand through the years, this begins in the mid-90s. These are the very years when the drug cartels along the border right there, right in that area, were really becoming big deal. And they were attracting a lot of kids attracted by the easy money and the cars and all that stuff. And so that's part of what I write about. Some of these kids could easily just have faded off into the cartel world, probably be dead by the time before their 21st birthday. And instead, through Roma Band in particular, in this case, they begin to feel like this great fulfillment from having worked together with everybody else. Like there's this kind of collaboration that goes on. And a lot of them go off to college to study music. A lot of them then come back as band instructors. Al Cortinas, in his career, he has a list. It's 81 names long. And these are all the kids that he taught in high school who then came back to be band directors somewhere in South Texas. 81 kids. Yeah, no, it's a remarkable accomplishment. He's a wonderful fellow. And but it's these are some of the things that band leaves behind. Also here, the other thing is kids graduate. They go on to productive lives. In Lopez's case, I think the dropout rate was 33%. Like a third of all freshmen did not get their diploma after 4 years. In band, the graduation rate was 100%. And I interviewed kids who were in the 2003, 2004 band. Now, the 20 years later, you know, and everyone was doing really, really well. Middle class security, middle class respectable job, family, all of that kind of stuff. To me, all of this, if you dig down into those communities and you find out who's the city councilman, who's the business owner, invariably what you find is that they have band somewhere in their backgrounds, and that the parents understand this. The parents can see the threat the cartels pose and can see that their kids, let's get my kid into band and then support that band.
Well, and I think an interesting thing that you said, that the parents could see the threat that the cartels posed. You know our story with our son growing up in an affluent area of Tucson. We did not know what was coming.
Sure.
We did not know that kids were in middle school were starting to use oxy, thinking that it was just another party drug to step up.
Yeah.
And so when there was finally this bust at his high school, when he was just turned 16, and we never heard about it, never heard a thing. And so that was that, again, that's that whole thing of the community. And part of it's our fault as parents that we weren't more involved with what was happening at school, but still, the school did not want
Yeah.
to let people know. They didn't want, they thought they could keep, in a sense, the facade, which is how I view it, of this affluent community going. And what happened was the drugs decimated lives that these kids, for kids especially in junior high, like you said, it's before they have the chance to get, they're just becoming themselves, and before they have the chance to get to learn about doing something where they're really fulfilled, you know,
Yeah.
and whether
Right.
they played in youth sports or something. And so I think the role of the dedicated teachers and the band leaders must have been
Yeah.
a way that helped these students persist despite those temptations and obstacles, right? That was
Yeah,
the
well, of course, and it's important to also to recognize that band directors, like, again, unnoticed, completely unnoticed most of the time. Like, just kids at school know them, but outside of that, these band directors are not well known, and yet the influence on kids is profound. People would always come up to me when I would speak about these other two books, Dreamland and The Least of Us. And after my speeches, they would say, well, what would you advise about keeping kids away from drugs? And, the truth is, I did not have a good answer. I did not have a good answer for that question. And now, though, I can say that the one thing I've seen that works is school band. Band, because it takes everybody. So if you want to work hard, you can be in band. You don't have to be athletically gifted. You don't have to be 6'9". You don't have to be 6'3" and 250. School athletics is very limiting. You can only accept a certain number of people, and they have to be very, very skilled. Band is about, let's let everybody in, and as long as they want to learn, as long as they want to practice hard, as long as they want to be a part of this community. Again, band directing is about community enhancement. Then they're in, and they're good. They just have to practice hard, And I think that, I don't know, to me, I think that is really one of the benefits. It's one of those things that sustains community, teaches the values that sustain community, postpone gratification, focus, discipline, collaboration. All of these things are so important. And I think that's why band kids tend, not 100% obviously, but tend to do really pretty solidly in life years later.
well,
There's a thing that a band director was asked, how did your band do after the end of the year? How'd your band do? And the director goes, it's too soon to tell. Ask me in 10 years. Meaning the way you measure band is it's about winning later. It's like, how do the kids turn out 10 years from now? That's how well this band did.
So that's, well, and something that that you brought up, and you know what? I think we should plan a second podcast where we talk about bands in the larger community of the world, because I have a couple of stories that have come to mind that I went, oh my gosh, I'm seeing exactly what you're talking about. So let's do that in another section, because I know you've got input on that. But one thing that you talked about in the book, about finding one's passion. And I thought that was really great. You cited a guy who responded to an article in the Atlantic or something about Isn't it finding one's passion necessary for a sense of fulfillment and purpose? And so, did the kids who
Yeah.
took up the tuba in these bands, especially in South Texas, find their passion and become excellent musicians and then find fulfillment, or did something more significant happen?
Now, I think this is true of many tuba players, and that's why it's also interesting to write about them, because they stand as kind of examples of how you really find passion, and that is through one thing, and that's hard work. That's it. If you can't put in the work to get over the humps that are, like, I can't play this note. Well, you got to practice to play the note and that kind of thing, In time, people who did not know what a tuba was come to believe that this is the only thing. This is such an important part of their lives. One of the guys I wrote about was Bob Carpenter. Bob Carpenter is a tuba player and an engineer, plays with the Orlando Symphony. But when he was given the tuba to play, because he was late, in his class, he didn't know what a tuba was, didn't know how to do, and it took about 2 weeks, and then with 2 weeks he could make I can't remember if it was a note or a scale, but whatever it was very rudimentary stuff. But it was that small step forward that was just intoxicating. And then he was able to play, into a higher register, a higher octave. And it just kind of gradually got better. And within 2 months, he was not a good tuba player, but he was better. He had seen how he had moved forward, and all of a sudden it was like, oh my God, this is what I want to do. And so then he began. Each little step forward gives him a little bit more encouragement to do a little bit more, to demand a little bit more of himself. And to me, I felt these stories, like Bob's story, he was important to the story for another reason, but what I loved about his initial story was that he found the tuba, and then the tuba kind of showed him what he was capable of. So many people have this story. The tuba showed him that he could do something that other people did not think was possible for him to do anyway. And that was like this uplifting thing. And for kids like that, drugs are like pointless. Like, why would you, no, I've got this thing to show me what I can do and how I can feel, and that I feel really good about myself. Whereas maybe when I started in band class, I was a tiny, skinny little kid who, no one paid any attention to, and to me, this was really the point of the book in the end. It was to show that, this is like the antidote to dope. It's the antidote to buying something that'll make me happy. No, it's putting in the work and showing yourself what you're capable of.
That's it. Well, okay, we're running out of time for this podcast, so I think we're going to continue. I want to tell everybody again, though, get yourself a copy of The Perfect Tuba. It is a great read, very enjoyable.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam, again for making the time and talking about how the needs that we all have for that sense of significance and fulfillment and purpose can come out of our needs, can come out of being, the scrawny kid that doesn't have a lot of friends, that's not cool, that doesn't have the big body or the glamorous, beautiful blonde hair or something. And those needs can then meet not just our own needs, but those of our community and family and stuff. So thank you. Thank you.
Actually, it was really great talking. Thank you. I appreciate the interest. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. You can check out all of Sam's work by going to samquinones.substack.com, and they'll be in the podcast notes. The great music you're hearing is by Gabe Kubanda at Kubanda Music. You can find him on any streaming service. The engineer is Ray Engineering of 3rd Street Productions right here in Tucson. And please consider following and rating and sharing this podcast. And going to my free Substack newsletter and leave a comment or something. Let us know how you feel about it. All right, love to hear from you. Bye.